What messed you up for the rest of your life? Unfortunate circumstances made it so there was a roughly 8-month period in my life where I didn't come into contact or even had the opportunity to interact with another human being on any meaningful level. I had a handful of brief nonverbal interactions with strangers and trails and in the backwoods, but that was the extent of it. I also failed a few attempts during this time as well, by sheer luck, I suppose. To give context, some very serious events took place prior, in which I lost all of who were once dear to me. On top of that, everyone in my past life had forgotten about me, abandoned me or crossed me in unforgivable ways, so I was put in a position where I genuinely had nothing. No way to obtain security or meet my basic needs. I had the clothes on my body, my backpack, a few tools, and that was it. All of my belongings. I'm fortunate, I guess, that this period started and ended at the end and beginning of the Canadian winter season. It admittedly led me down a very dark path. I resorted to stealing from dumpsters, breaking into abandoned cabins for lodging, etc. And I did many other things I'm not proud of and truly regret doing. Going that long isolated and left with nothing but your thoughts to dwell on is something I would not wish upon anyone. The harmful effects it has had on me, I feel, are irreversible. Like many of you, I experienced life in lockdown, but that minor inconvenience was a joke compared to this. The long-term starvation, constant pain, longing for human contact and to be listened to, it gradually led me to losing my sanity. I became a shell of what I once was. I consider the time before all that happened to be my past life because, to this day, I'm still in the process of recovering both physically and emotionally. I am, by all means of the phrase, a changed man. It ruined my once innate ability to understand subtle social cues and sustain healthy connections with people. I can't imagine the strength it took to survive such an ordeal. Story 2. Quick background. My grandmother lost her right leg to cancer in the early 80s, so she used crutches for as long as I can remember. My uncle did substance on and off my whole life. Whether he was spiked or not, he always thought I was messing with him when I was just being a normal little kid. He was about 15-ish years older than me, but between the substance and him already having a learning disability, he never really matured beyond the level of a mid-teens boy. Anyway, one day after he got super spiked, he stopped by Grandma's house for food and money, as he would a couple of times a week. Grandma just left for the corner store in her car for something real quick. I was like 9, and I was only going to be alone for a moment, so she left me there. When my uncle came into the house, he went right into the kitchen and started grabbing stuff. I reminded him that before he just started going crazy taking food, he needed to wait for Grandma to get back and tell him what is okay to take, mainly because Grandma needed to know what to replace. He took that as me smart-mouthing him and took off. My grandmother got back just as he left, seeing he was mad, and told him to calm down and talk to her. He was screaming at her, saying I was being a little crap or something and telling her what I said. She told him to basically grow up or act his age or something, and that I was simply telling him exactly what she had asked me to tell him when he comes over, so she doesn't start cooking something only to find we're missing ingredients mid-process. He didn't like that, and took it as she chose my side. He left super mad. Grandma came inside and we thought that was the end of things. It wasn't. About 5 minutes later, he came back screaming with a weapon in his hands that he was going to harm me. He got the phone line to the house and then proceeded to break down the front door. It took a minute, as it was a very solid hardwood door, but he got through. Once we had seen him get that far, she thought it was just trying to be scary, banging on the door, not breaking in. She told me to go into the bathroom. She quickly grabbed her crutches and followed me in, and we locked ourselves in the bathroom. My uncle continued to break through the front door, screaming awful things. He eventually got in, went to the bathroom, and started busting that door in as well. It wasn't until he saw how terrified Grandma was and how much she was crying that he snapped back into himself and realized how psycho he was being. He left and got arrested about 2 minutes after as he made such a ruckus. The neighbors noticed him breaking in with a weapon and baked the cops. In conclusion, to this day, I still have PTSD from that and other BS my uncle pulled while spiked over the years. I have nightmares of him chasing me down or whatever. The sound of hammering and solid wood sometimes triggers me if I'm not the one doing it, or at least next to the person doing it. This still happens to this day, even though my uncle has been gone for years. It isn't like I'm generally scared of him in that sense. I was able to defend myself and kick his back from like 14 to 15 onwards. It's just that he always went so crazy. It's that side of him that left the lasting damage. Story 3. My niece passed away on October 7th, 2024. She was 14. She ended it all while on FaceTime with her friends. From what I gather from her texts and her phone, it was a pact, but the other girls didn't follow through but screen recorded it and then proceeded to show the video at school. It took the girl 45 minutes to call my sister-in-law to tell her daughter was gone. Like she was making sure that my niece was definitely gone before calling her mom. The heartbreak I felt and saw on my sister-in-law's face at the wake broke me. Hearing how much she wanted to be gone to be with her baby again broke me. Upon going through my niece's phone, I also found out she was blackmailing her stepdad to buy her drinks and grass because he was attracted to her. That she never slept while at home because she was scared of him. I also found out that she was hearing voices while I was reading deleted notes on her phone. Reading her note, her broken mom over the phone because she wanted the cell phone away from her husband, stepdad, and to go through it for her because she couldn't figure out the iPhone. All of this has me so messed up, and now my daughter lost her cousin 3 years apart. And I cuddle my baby a little tighter now because it's messed up my brain thinking mine will do it too. And it's not something I would survive. Story 4. My mom passed away on Christmas Eve and I was 6 from cancer. She had been suffering for a long time, but I was too young to understand. I remember hearing boots outside my bedroom door during the night and thinking it was Santa. I only realized later it was probably paramedics coming to take her away. When I got up in the morning, I asked my dad if she had already gone downstairs, even though she had basically been in a coma the night before. He had to tell me she'd passed away overnight. Sometimes I think about how traumatic it must have been for him, for his wife to pass away in bed next to him. He's been emotionally distant for as long as I can remember. For me, having a parent pass away that young, sometimes thinking about what my life would have been like if she had lived is worse than the loss itself. Story 5. When I was around a similar 9 age, I remember looking out my window at the house across the street and seeing my neighbor through the front windows. They had really high ceilings in the front of the house with super tall windows along the front. And I asked my mom what they were doing, and she just kind of ignored me. I kept checking the window and seeing if they were still there, and they were there for hours, until finally we heard screaming out front and sirens following shortly after. I watched them take it down and take them out of the house. I saw multiple family members showing up in a panic, asking if he was okay, just to find out that he didn't make it. Each one experiences their grief in a different way. One angry, one hysterical, one almost catatonic, and one who seemingly didn't care at all. Nowadays, they have a big chandelier that is hanging, at least from the perspective of my window, in roughly the same place I saw him. Story 6. I became a foster parent because I lost my biological children before they were old enough to start school. It was a very different time back in those days. Over the years, I fostered 8 kids. Most of them I only kept temporarily. 2 of them I had for life. The youngest is 22 and is not completely settled. The foster system in my state wanted me to take on more at the age of 72 because I was one of the good ones. But I explained that the 22-year-old wasn't completely an adult at this point. I was told that I should drop that one like a hot potato so that I could take on more. Drop my child that I have raised since the age of 2. After I doctored her wounds, helped her get back the use of her leg, and watched her grow. Just drop her because she's over the age of 18. No way. Anyway, this isn't my traumatic event. It's just my personal experience with the foster system. I'm not in my 70s, I'm in my 90s. I was 92 when my state asked me to take on another kid, albeit temporarily. I'm 95 now, I think. I tend to forget. I remember my year of birth is 1929. Hard to keep up with everyone's age because they seem to change every year. Story 7. My family. The abandonment and CPTSD from a family that never cared about, loved, or trusted me. Always being the mistreated and back end of every joke, then gaslit to believe that's how people are. Ignored and laughed at. They still treat me like I'm a child, even though I'm 29 and have a younger sibling. They treated her with more respect when I was a kid, and it was painfully lonely. Nothing I say has any meaning, even now. My father's family is physically and emotionally cruel in every way, toxic and manipulative. My mom still had me go visit as a kid. She's mentally ill, refuses proper help, and doesn't care about fixing a relationship. She just wants me in her life so she gets what she wants. She thinks nothing through. How my mother enables my sister to mistreat me. Her only response was, "The meek and the mild will inherit the earth. Endure the pain, and he shall reward you." She's married dumb men most of her life. They all passed away from their own bad life choices entirely. First of cancer, second of cancer, third of stupid choices. I cleaned up after the last one. She once stayed with a man for years because he refused to take care of his 4- and 6-year-old kids while I was still a kid. So she once again abandoned me to take care of others when I just wanted our family to matter. She kept chasing this dream life that she couldn't achieve. I met my partner and his family 8 years ago. I'm still learning just how messed up my family is, and it's causing a lot of late onset issues. Luckily, they're patient and loving, so I get to start my better life now. But I still can't help but mourn the loss of my entire childhood and early adulthood. Story 8. I started a career in healthcare. I've seen a lot of people passing away. A lot of them have been in the room with as it happened. A lot of them were less than 50 years old. The first one being only 35 and I'm 29. I've watched a lot of families make their loved ones suffer before passing away because of fake or inaccurate things they see on TikTok or Facebook. I had a 94-year-old patient recently with severe Alzheimer's with a family who refused to think Alzheimer's was a real thing. The blame her confusion on us, refused to let her have pain meds so she wasn't sleepy in her bed. They revoked her DNR status so we wouldn't have to perform CPR if she passed away, which would have been very messy. So many people try to extend their family members' lives when they obviously are beyond help and usually ready to pass away. Not to mention, I get treated like garbage constantly, and I'm an incredibly easy person to get along with. They give me 10 patients over a 12-hour day. Maybe one or two if I'm lucky. Get up by themselves so they expect us to make sure everyone gets a bath. Brushes their teeth, eats 3 meals, each morsel of food and drop of fluid they consume documented. Help all of them to the bathroom when needed, and many of them take 45 minutes or more each time and go several times a day. Take 2 or 3 sets of vitals in each person, assist in emergencies, transport people around the hospital, make sure they're all weighed daily, stock the rooms, and make sure trash is taken out, plus a bunch of other things. On top of all that, I have to try to keep grandma with severe dementia down the hall who likes to throw punches from getting out of bed every 5 minutes. You can probably imagine why people would constantly be upset or feel like they're not getting enough help or support. Way too many responsibilities fall under one person. There's never enough time of day to do it all. Story 9. My daughter was conditioned. Bit of a long story. I had to restrict her from the online world when it was the only way she could talk to friends and family far away. It ended a crap load of her creativity and left her isolated, and she began getting pestered. I set up tons of restrictions and had to check her phone when she was back online. The freaking criminal came back. The things I had to screenshot and submit to the police who never did anything almost broke me. It mucked up her perspective of love and men, which was already obliterated by her dad and prior cruelty. Meanwhile, a friend was charged with soliciting him, but the judge worked out that it was actually provable police entrapment. Yet the friend couldn't afford to go to trial. Now they're on a list, which I know will eventually drive them to depression. I've done university-level studies on offenders and am passionate about appropriate treatment, which has higher chances at stopping reoffending. But despite the decades of evidence, there is more money in letting offenders go to jail to be laborers, while learning how to offend more insidiously and extensively. I have zero respect for people eager to get away with harming others for personal gratification and financial gain. Story 10. I don't know about the rest of my life, but it definitely puts it into perspective how inconsiderate my mom can be. When I was 16, I dated a guy who was 18. The stereotypes are true. Guys who do that are only looking for one thing. I was pressured into having intimacy with him, and long story short, ended up cheating on me with my best friend. He was a terrible person. We both were. I tried to report the situation to the police. Nothing came out of it, but I begged my parents not to tell my sisters about the entire thing. At some point, we were leaving to go somewhere as a family, and I asked my mom if she had told my sisters what happened, and her response was, "Yes, I told your sisters that their sister is a witch." And she laughed. It honestly destroyed me. I started bawling right there in front of her. She immediately felt bad. Yeah, and she apologized and said she would never tell my sisters something like that, and that was way out of line for her to say. But because of that moment, it started to occur to me how inconsiderate my mom can be. My feelings don't always get taken seriously, and that it's difficult to trust her with things that matter. Story 11. My ex threatened me for months, claiming she'll end it all if I break up. When I finally did, she started dating a classmate within 1 month and lied to everyone that I mistreated her, to save herself from the embarrassment. I lost a ton of friends. I didn't attend my own graduation because I would just be surrounded by people who supported her without question. 4 years later, they got married, while I was single and struggling with depression. 7 years later, now, I'm happily married and consider myself very lucky to have met my wonderful wife, but I still get messed up when I remember my ex. I keep thinking, how could she have been okay hurting someone's reputation to that extent? How does she sleep at night knowing I lost so many friends because of her lie? Well, at least she found someone who appreciates her dramatic flair. Maybe they have matching misunderstood soul tattoos now. Story 12. Honestly, it's been parenting my own children. I grew up in a dysfunctional, cruel household. My dad, later found out, not even my bio dad, was a cruel drinker, and my mom was a textbook narcissist with unmedicated bipolar. I was refused treatment for ADHD because mom couldn't have me labeled. Now I'm treating myself and my own children. It would have saved me so goddamn much stress and mental suffering to have meds or even non-medical accommodations. She would flip out on me for the smallest things, And now I'm being gentle with my kids while they do the same crap. It's not that hard to treat them kindly, to not harm the crap out of them. My brother doesn't have kids and has blocked out most of our childhood. I read once that scurvy causes old scars to reopen. It feels like that. Story 13. From 16 to 20, I thought the world was crazy filled with bad people as a teenager from what I read online. Living through it truly sets it in. The club I worked at, people would take they found off the floor because, the universe provides. So sad because I'd talk to them at the bar and see their soul only for them to gamble with it. A guy creeping on my coworker doesn't take rejection well, gets rejected by her, he gets caught trying to go into the ladies' room. When our security left, he went right back in for guessable reasons. A guy in a hoodie approached me while I was smoking. How much? For substance. No for me. Brother, I attend bars, not the corner. Surrounded by a bunch from a rival high school. Football and hoodlums BS. As they tried to rob me. Just for a head rush. I'm half Latino, half Caucasian, working with a relative. He looks at me. There's gonna be no white people in 100 years. And goes on this stupid rant. Then to say, even the white families aren't fully white. Waking me up to true prejudice. I saw an elderly woman struggling in the winter and was going to turn around to get the door for her. For her to say, "What are you looking at?" Somehow listening it makes me laugh. How obscene. How do people get to a place where they behave like this? Not my circus, not my monkeys, though. Story 14. I had some issues as a kid and repeated a year. Kids were pestering me, and of course, they were good kids with amazing grades. So I had to be the issue there. Once, someone told me there were like 5 kids, but had only 1 liter, so 6 schmucks together, put some pills into my bottle. I heard it was supposed to be some laxative. However, I knew and didn't drink it. Luckily, because I found the name of the pills, they threw the thingy that held the pills into the trash and asked about it. It was for a high blood pressure and it could kill me. I snapped, defended myself, and got 1.5-year probation for defending myself. Only 1 slap. That was all. The rest was more or less pushing and screaming. They found out they could do more because everyone was protecting them. Another kid tried that too and accused me of being violent and whatnot. They didn't buy it, fortunately. They were pestering me even outside of the school, throwing dog crap at my window and so on. Sometimes at night they started throwing things at it. I woke up and could even fall asleep later. Thanks to that, I suffered from massive social phobia and also I can't properly sleep. Even a tiny strange noise made me jumpy. Despite I don't care anymore about them, not even holding grudges, despite the last time I saw one, he was still acting like a moron and was mocking me. By the way, at the time, he was an adult. But somehow was still locked deep inside of me even 22 years later. I'm still afraid to talk to people, because any group reminds me of them. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 15. My wife's siblings is passing that she will never recover from. It was 3 of her siblings who all passed away within a 5-year span. My brother-in-law was living with my mother-in-law, and one night he never came home, but his car was found empty with all his belongings. It was found almost a month later in the river, almost unrecognizable. They say it was an accident, but the autopsy showed he had multiple wounds. Second passing was sister-in-law who helped me out during a bad time. She went out one night and ended up in a fight with some girl, and when the fight looked like my sister-in-law was winning, the girl's boyfriend jumped in and started hurting my sister-in-law. The couple was arrested, but the girl saw no prison time and the boyfriend only got 2 years in prison with 1 year parole. The last one was my other sister-in-law, who passed away from complications. My wife used to have a sweet and warm personality, but now she just has become cold, hateful, and would rather watch the world burn. Therapy didn't work, so she just gave up as well. And I just don't know what to do but to support her as much as I can. Story 16. Seeing my dad after he coded and was laying in the hospital stretcher. His eyes weren't all the way closed, so I gently tried to close them with my hands, but unfortunately, it wouldn't stay closed all the way. I kissed him on the forehead, and feeling every single emotion all at once was something that has stuck with me ever since that day, 12.5 years ago. Also, going to check on our grandfather that was in hospice. I checked on him every single day and helped him with things and changing his dressings and his wounds that he developed. He had aggressive cancer, and I watched him dwindle down to hardly 100 pounds soaking wet. The morning when I walked into the house and found him lying on the couch, I noticed that he looked different. I touched his cheek after calling his name, which brought me back to when my dad passed away and everything I saw and went through. These were some of the more difficult things I've been through and witnessed in my life, along with others, sadly. On a positive note, our grandfather was in his late 80s and had a great life. And he said he had no regrets and was ready to leave this earth. It was suffering, and I knew he was ready, so when he passed peacefully in his sleep like we all hoped he would when it was his time, that was at least one bit of comfort in the whole situation. Rest in peace, Daddy and Grandpa. Story 17. I can tell you what the hell most people do for the rest of their lives that I learned early on and quit letting it bother me. And that is worrying about things from the past, present, and future that you cannot control, rather than letting myself be down on crap that I cannot control or just becoming a victim myself. I just went on marching on forward and refusing to tap out. I realize some people are probably going to say, well, you can't help what happened to you, and how can you just forget that? My point is, you control what you think of. You control what you think about, and you control what holds you back. Instead of dwelling on it and beating yourself up about it and letting it ruin your life whenever the thought comes up, think of something that motivates you and do something besides dwelling on what happened. And instead, you need to plow your own path and make good things happen. And if it is people in your life that have caused you to feel this way and have done bad things to you that could potentially ruin your life, these simple things to do would be to cut that person or those people out and do what I recommend above. Because I spent a little bit of time thinking that something that happened to me had ruined my life, and then one day, I just snapped out of it and said, that's enough. I control what I do, I control what I think about, and I control what will hold me back, and I refused to tap out. I refused to let it hold power over me, something that has already happened that I cannot change or control, and I decided that day, never again. Story 18. After reading this forum, I just have a huge found respect for everything people go through. Like, wow. Y'all keep your head up. My goodness, stay strong. I'll give mine quick, but it's not that bad. Shortly after my parents' horrible breakup and I was in elementary school, my mom took my brother and I to Disney World with her new man and his 2 kids. Parents weren't even fully properly divorced yet. It was all too fast and no time to process anything. I absolutely hated the trip. Even though I was young, I could understand that this was a messed up thing. That relationship didn't last. My parents are both happily married to new people they met well after the divorce. I'm not an angry person, but I think that if I ever learned the last name of the dude from the Disney trip, I'd end him. Or at least severely maim him because I see him as a main catalyst for the destruction of my family. I know it's more complicated than that. It's just a weird thing to carry. I can't ask my mom his name because that's just weird. It's weird to hold this feeling of wanting to hurt someone. The guy might not even be a bad person. Maybe he thought the relationship between my parents was long gone. I have a hard time believing that, though. On behalf of my broken family, I'd hurt the heck out of him. Story 19. When I was 15, I went to Thanksgiving with my dad to his side of the family, while my mom and brothers went to my mom's side. When he was dropping me off, he asked if I'd come to Christmas too. I said, okay. Christmas came, and my mom and brothers went their own way. My dad never showed up. He just deserted my brothers and I. I'm 36 and haven't seen or heard from him since. It's really screwed up the family dynamic, and my brothers both got into substance heavy. When I was 18, my best friend's mom started misusing pain medication. She got into a huge fight with my friend. I called the cops and said she was going to get her some help. She said she had something for that, so she ended herself. She was an awesome, beautiful person, but succumbed to her habits in the worst way. 6 months later, my oldest brother ended it all also. I type this from my couch while my daughter is asleep on my lap in a safe, substance-free home. I'm not problem-free from those things, but I have a good life. Story 20. I was attacked by a carload of people from my phone. I had no idea what they were talking about, and this 14-year-old hit me with a metal bat, and I ran away. I was 15 to 16 at the time, and it was probably the most dangerous thing I'd been in that point in my life. Broke down in front of the police and just couldn't hold the tears back. Still went to work after the interview. I've always struggled with seeming weak and also talking about myself. Usually I let others speak and I'd listen. It was hard, but I talked to some coworkers about it and they brushed it off. Went to school and told my classmates and friends what happened and received little to no sympathy. Some even looked down on me for not being able to fight someone younger than me, and that I was a witch to run away. I tried explaining to them that I saw an older guy in the passenger seat and obviously there had to be a driver, so there was at least 3 people in their car and their response was, I would have taken them. Like, okay, John Wick, why the hell are you sitting in my year 10 commerce class and not in Afghanistan right now? Anyway, at least once a week since then, I replay the events. What I could have done differently and tossed up whether I should have fought back or ran. But it made me realize that, as a man, no one really cares about you. You aren't allowed to have feelings and you're supposed to fight to the end over the smallest things in life. The whole experience felt emasculating. And then I felt guilty because of all the other people who have had worse muggings or worse childhoods. I just want to retreat from the world and never speak to anyone again. I can't deal with this any longer. The problems don't exist because someone else has it worse. Or it's my fault that I was attacked because I was next to the road and on my phone. Nah, I must have done something to warrant the attack. Screw society. I'm gonna go cry in this corner over there. Story 21. I was a victim of neglect at school as a child. Just before lunch, I went into the disabled bathroom because I myself have a disability and had a crap accident. I decided to stay there out of embarrassment, believing that someone would come to find me. Nobody did. I missed the whole of lunch. 2 critical medications administered by the school nurse, registration, and I was marked as being there. None of my best friends at the time wondered where I was. None of my peers did, or any teachers. I was stuck in that bathroom for 4 hours. And I essentially went missing, but nobody knew I actually was. The only way I got out was looking when the coast was clear, when I luckily managed to find a teacher. But by that point, it was time to go home. My parents went to court over it and thankfully won. The school is still open, by the way, and I live insanely close to it. They are really hyped up in my local area, but the people who work there know exactly what it's like. I hope the school gets their karma, honestly, because it made me feel invisible. Story 22. When I was 12 years old, I tried to meet a group of kids from public school down at the baseball field. I wound up getting tossed around. Been stalked and pestered by that gang for the next 3 years every night I went to hang at the baseball field. My favorite place to go to get away from my alcoholic mother. I've had back pain ever since, but I've also never tried to meet or even talk to people for the last 59 years. I'm terrified of people, and there's nothing I can do to change it. It's now embedded in my programming. I've had a great life, though. Done things and traveled to places I never thought I would. I'm ecstatic feeding the birds and the squirrels and snorkeling with the fish. People can have cancer, and I've avoided them my whole life. Most people complain about other people. I've avoided that daily stress altogether. The birds and the squirrels never judge, so I never have any worries or stress in the back of my neck. Story 23. When I was in 6th grade, Dad decided to move us from Oklahoma back to Pennsylvania so that we could be near our grandparents. In Oklahoma, I was in a small public school. I was growing up with my classmates. I had lots of friends. I was happy and easygoing and well-adjusted. In Pennsylvania, I was dropped into a large public school and my age group was going through puberty. As the new kid, I got harmed a lot. I had my stuff vandalized. It was hell. It changed me so quickly that my parents noticed and brought me to a therapist, who recommended they put me into a small, all-boys private Catholic prep school. The pestering there was even worse. I remember we took a class trip to Germany and I kept a diary of what I saw there, and that got stolen from my luggage and edited, and photocopied and passed around the all-girls school down the street. Being pestered in high school destroyed me. It changed who I was as a person. I lost my self-confidence, and 4 decades later, I still haven't gotten it all back. I put all that behind me, moved on with my life. I have plenty to be proud of, but I miss the person I was, and I wish I could have grown up with my friends. Story 24. My former marriage. I had girlfriends when I was younger. When we'd break up, it hurt, but it wasn't really that traumatizing. It was like coming down off a substance you'd been used to for a while. My marriage was different. I didn't love her when I met her. I didn't love her when I proposed. I was so over women at this point that marrying her was just me giving into one of those things that she nagged about all the time. When are we going to get married? Don't you love me? If you loved me, you'd stop postponing it and pick a date. I finally proposed and she didn't want a wedding. She didn't like things that were a big hassle. She was prepared to just go to the courthouse and get it over with. In the end, we had a friend of my parents who was the preacher of a small church marry us in a tiny ceremony in his living room. It was an odd wedding, to be sure. We didn't know we needed to bring a witness, so he got his son and grandsons to step into the house and bear witness to our exchange of vows. The preacher's son was an adult and had been outside teaching his kids to shoot a pellet gun, so throughout the surreal ceremony, my mind was on the fact that some kid had a pellet gun resting in his lap 4 feet from where my fiancé and I were getting married. I thought it was funny. It was like a parody of a wedding. That same day after we got back from the wedding, a girl I met online who came up to live with me for a month, and the very woman who was responsible for why I decided to get married and why I was so burnt out on women called me at my mother-in-law's house from Florida. I was in Missouri. We hadn't seen each other for over a year. We were head over heels for each other until we met in person. I was still into her, but she had immediate regrets the moment she laid her eyes on me. She told me bluntly she regretted her decision to come meet me in person the moment she saw me. She stayed a month because she was afraid to go back to her parents after fighting with them over her decision to leave Florida to go have a relationship with some stranger she met on the internet. I understood, and had no problem letting her stay a month before she went back to her parents. I tried to be sweet to her and take her around to show her the sights of where we lived, but she came from a rich background and was derisive toward me the entire time. She spent the entirety of that 1 month completely tearing me down, explaining how I was utterly pathetic and how crappy everything and everyone in my life was. At the end of the month, her parents came up to pick her up. She begged me not to be there when her parents showed up because she didn't want them to see me and see just how bad her decision was. Despite how horrible she was to me, I gave in to her wish and dropped her off at a state park. This was before cell phones, so I couldn't get confirmation that everything went okay. I just waited outside the park to make sure she didn't end up stranded there in case her parents didn't show up. I found it hard to overcome my nature being the nice guy. When I saw her parents arrive and they all left, I left. I immediately quit all 3 of my jobs, went and applied for a factory job in a nearby town and enrolled in college. I also swore off women in relationships. 10 months later, one of my female college friends set me up on a blind date. I didn't know I was on a date. She didn't tell me. She just tricked me into coming to a bar to pick her up after claiming she was too drunk to drive home. I couldn't find my friend when I got there, so I just went to the table we usually occupied after spotting a couple of her male friends drinking. A breathtaking beauty was sitting there chatting them up, someone I'd never seen before. When she started chatting me up, I responded only to be polite. In my experience, when pretty girls are being nice to me, it is usually because they're up to something, responding to someone else's dare or there's some kind of grift involved. I figured she was just a barfly trying to be nice to me in hopes I'd buy her a fresh drink or something. Turns out she was my blind date. Realized that was the one my college friend told her about and liked what she saw. I found out later that this woman that I would end up marrying in a few months liked big teddy bear type guys. Anyway, this girl who ripped apart my life in a month, that's gotta be some kind of special talent, called me 20 minutes after me and my wife got home from our wedding. We hadn't even finished describing the ceremony to her mom when this woman called me out of the blue. Turns out she remembered my cousin's phone number and got my mother-in-law's number from him. She wanted to give it one more chance now that she'd lost her V-card and had time to think about how hard I tried to find something to impress her with while she was staying with me. Her calling just reaffirmed my desire to not become emotionally attached ever again. I kept telling myself in my head that I would never care for someone again like I did with that girl from Florida. I promised myself that if things didn't work out with the woman I married, I'd walk away from the marriage as soon as it became complicated. And then I got her pregnant. I had a Grinch moment where my heart grew 3 sizes that day. Holding your child in your arms completely changes you. I instantly fell in love with my daughter, and eventually the woman I married. Despite the fact that my new wife was a watered-down version of the girl from Florida, they both came from wealthier families and were accustomed to a better level of living than I was. Despite that, I tried my damnedest to give my wife and my daughter the best life I could. I nearly passed away in 3 different car wrecks while performing the duties of my job. I also dodged falling off a 4th-floor balcony during the same job because I needed the money to ensure my wife's lifestyle. And no matter what I did, I could never live up to her expectations. We were together for 6.5 years. Her sister and only sibling ended up passing away suddenly due to a rare medical condition out of the blue. With no warning. I couldn't stay for the funeral because it was in Kentucky and we lived in Missouri. We had stayed for over a week and a half while an autopsy was being done to figure out the cause of her sister's passing. I had to leave to cover checks I wrote for rent and utilities and other bills before we'd left Missouri for this. We then went through an ice storm a few months after she buried her sister, where our whole town and surrounding areas were out of power for 10 days. To make it more stressful, I've been in one of those bad car wrecks that nearly ended me 1 month before the ice storm hit. Not surprisingly, she ended up cheating on me and filing for divorce 8 months later. After those 2 women, I can't bring myself to date anymore. I tried, but it felt like a huge chore going through the dating rituals. There, in the first 5 years after our divorce, I couldn't even get a stimulation. I finally stopped trying to date, stopped admiring how pretty the women around me were, and finally managed to make my spirit and my actual age match. I'm 50 now and prefer to be alone. I don't visit my family. I rarely spend time with my 2 buddies who live in the same building. Other than my affection for my daughter who is in her last year of college, I really have no emotional connection to anyone else on this planet. And while I detest Trump and the Republican Party, after they won, it didn't really matter to me. It mattered leading up to the election, but afterward, I don't really give a damn. I raised my daughter well and to be a survivor, so I know that if things get tough, she'll just move to where life is easier since she has no siblings to tie her down here or to this country. Not having to worry about my daughter's future and well-being and not having anyone else I'm close to really puts everything in perspective and, in a way, is quite liberating. Still, I'm incredibly lonely and crave the intimacy of physical contact that my wife and I used to share. Not just the times when we held each other while watching television or the time where we laid in bed spooning while procrastinating getting out of bed on our day off. I miss waking up to find either my toddler daughter or my wife's dog and cat wedged in between me and my wife. I'm not depressed, but I do look forward to the day when my life is finally over. I live every day like I'm holding my breath. I'll regret the effect my passing will have on my daughter when it comes, but at the same time, I wait with a giddy eagerness for the day I draw my last breath, the day I can finally relax. I imagine that last breath will be the most satisfying relaxed breath I will have. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.